Welcome, wanderer. For these next few moments, there is nothing you must do, nowhere you must rush. Let this quiet find you the way starlight finds a sleeping field, slowly, gently, without asking permission. Tonight, I want to offer you something small yet endless. A question that glows like a faint lantern at the edge of the mind. Have you ever wondered why the world of the very small feels like a half-remembered dream? Why the deeper we look into the fabric of things, the more it slips through our grasp? Maybe it is because we are made of the same mystery, tiny flickers of chance, a pulse of probability drifting through space and memory. Before we drift too far, let me remind you, if you ever need to step away, do. If your thoughts scatter or your eyelids grow heavy, know that this soft wonder will wait here for you when you return. So find your place. Let the night cradle you, whether you're curled on a couch, lying under blankets, or simply listening to the hum of a distant street lamp. Somewhere close, a kettle sighs, a page turns, a star flickers awake. And we begin. If I listen closely, I can almost hear the house breathe. It's just past 2 in the morning, the hour when the clocks feel most honest. The kitchen window frames a thin slice of sky, where the moon leans into its own reflection on the garden pond. The kettle on the counter clicks as it cools. I stand barefoot on the tiles, toes pressing into the cold, trying to decide whether I'm awake by choice or by some faint tug from the dark. Outside, a single moth bumps against the glass, tracing the same invisible circle over and over. I wonder what it sees: a cold moon, a tired woman, or just its own trembling reflection. There's an old telescope in the study upstairs, a gift from my father when I was 12. I tell myself I might use it tonight, but I know I won't. Instead, I stand here with my mug cooling in my palms, staring through the pane at the unremarkable garden that once belonged to my grandmother. She kept it trimmed and proper, a careful geometry of hedges and roses. Now it's grown soft and wild. Vines curl through the fence like quiet rebellions. A fox passes through some nights, pausing to sniff the air before melting back into the hedgerow. My students always think quantum physics is an explosion of weirdness. They want stories of particles appearing and vanishing, cats both dead and alive. They want me to stand at the front of the lecture hall and perform uncertainty like a magic trick. But truth is, the quantum world isn't fireworks. It's more like a hush that wraps around everything. It's the gentle contradiction that nothing is ever fully here or fully there. And the deeper you listen, the more you realize you're part of the hush too. The mug warms my fingers, but does nothing for my thoughts. I remember my father, standing just where I stand now, pouring tea at impossible hours. He used to say the best questions arrive when the house is half asleep. He would lean on the counter and talk about light, how it could be a wave and a particle, how it could dance through the dark and still remember where it came from. He'd tap the kettle and say, "The universe has a memory, you know." I'd roll my eyes, too young to love the puzzle, but I see it now. Maybe he wasn't talking about physics at all. Maybe he was just trying to remind me that nothing truly leaves us. The garden beyond the glass doesn't care about my remembering. A drift of cloud covers the moon for a moment, and the pond loses its borrowed glow. Somewhere beneath the ivy, something tiny shifts, a mouse or maybe nothing at all. I wonder if the smallest things ever wonder about me. If the corks in my cup feel my hands warm, as an event or a gentle rumor. I glance at the clock above the sink. 2:17. Time moves here like a shy animal, hesitant, never quite trusting its own footsteps. I think of the equations on my desk upstairs, half-finished proofs that promise to explain why particles do what they do, why they slip sideways through certainty, why they refuse to stay politely in place. And yet, for all their numbers, they can't tell me why I wake at this hour, or why the hush of night feels heavier than the day's noise. I lift the mug to my lips, and find it's gone cold. Still, I drink. Steam is only an illusion of warmth anyway. The taste is flat but familiar. Sometimes I think comfort is just the name we give to repetition. This cup, this window, this moment that feels like so many other moments. Yet in the space between them, something shifts. Something small and strange and very nearly true. I catch my reflection in the glass, an outline inside an outline. Behind it, the garden folds in on itself, shadows layered over shadows. Somewhere in that tangle, maybe a falling speck of dust has landed, a bit of star ash, a sliver of rock that has drifted too far from home. It might be here already, pressed into the soul, unnoticed but not entirely lost. Or maybe it hasn't landed yet. Maybe it never will. Maybe it's the thought of it that matters more than the thing itself. When I was 8, I dreamed I opened a door and found nothing but stars waiting on the other side. No floor, no ceiling, just a soft ocean of points and shadows. I didn't step through. I only watched. Some nights, I think I'm still standing there, my hand on the doorknob, wondering if I'd fall forever or if I'd wake in my own bed, tangled in sheets that hold more secrets than any equation could solve. The kettle ticks as the metal cools. The moth has given up its orbit, vanishing into the dark. I think about time again, how the clock insists on its small seconds while the universe unfolds in vast, indifferent waves. Somewhere, far beyond my garden, particles are drifting in and out of being, entangled across distances I can't imagine. They hum to each other through the silence, carrying secrets older than our sun. And here I am, standing barefoot in a pool of kitchen light, a soft witness to a question I can't quite name. I rinse the mug in the sink. The water runs clear and cold, catching the faint glow of the overhead bulb. Droplets beat on my wrist like tiny planets. I stand there a while longer, letting the water run, as if it might wash away the ache of needing to know what can't be fully known. When I turn off the tap, the house returns to its hush. The pond outside gathers the moon again. The garden shifts in its sleep. I imagine, just for a moment, that I am small enough to slip through the gaps between atoms, to drift like a photon through a window that never quite closes. I imagine I could land softly on the garden path, become part of the soul or the fox's breath or the frost that will settle before dawn. And maybe, in that tiny drifting, I would find an answer waiting, simple, impossible, and true. The morning arrives as a pale suggestion more than a declaration, slipping through the thin curtains in my bedroom, settling on my eyelids before I am ready to lift them. I stay there, beneath the covers, listening to the soft tick of the clock on the nightstand, feeling the weight of sleep that has never quite settled, a gentle tug reminding me that something unfinished drifts just beyond the edges of my thoughts. Outside the window, the garden holds the dawn carefully, as if it knows the day should not be dropped too quickly into my waiting hands. When I finally rise, the floorboards creak beneath my feet like old friends clearing their throats. I move slowly to the small study that overlooks the garden pond and the scatter of tangled hedges, the telescope a slim sentinel by the window. Its brass body is cold when I touch it, a relic of my father's quiet belief that all mysteries deserved at least one faithful witness. I think of him more often than I admit, especially in moments like this when the house is silent and the air tastes faintly of damp wood and dust. He would stand here too, one eye pressed to the scope, tracing the faint scatter of stars that linger even after the sun insists they should be gone. Sometimes I wonder if he ever really saw what he was looking for, or if the comfort came only from looking. I open the window a few inches, and the early air slips in, cool and tinged with the earthy breath of the garden. Somewhere beneath the hedge something rustles, but does not reveal itself. I imagine it could be the fox again, or a stray cat testing the border between night and morning. I lean into the window frame, the telescope angled now not at distant galaxies, but at the slow drift of daylight rising behind the neighboring rooftops. I trace my finger along the rim of the lens and think about the tiny speck that might have fallen last night. The thought of it folding itself into the garden soil, or perhaps into the shadows of my own mind where impossible things like to root themselves and grow. Last night feels both distant and immediate, like a word I almost remember but never quite speak. I return to my desk and flip open the same battered notebook, the one with its soft creased pages and ink stains that spread like small galaxies across the margins. There, beneath the scribbled formulas and half-formed questions, I see the word I wrote before the kettle cooled, maybe circled like a stone dropped in still water, and below it another word, dream. They sit together in my shaky handwriting as if they have been waiting through the night for me to notice they belong to the same sentence. I rest the pen between my fingers, feeling the familiar groove where my thumb presses the barrel smooth. Somewhere beneath the weight of practical concerns, lesson plans to mark, emails to answer, errands waiting, I feel a gentle insistence that today will not stay ordinary if I let it slip open at the seams. I look again through the window at the pond catching the first true light. A thin mist hovers just above the water's surface, dissolving as the sun lifts itself a fraction higher. I imagine for a moment that I could see the particles themselves, the quarks dancing their uncertain dance, the photons flaring like whispers of intent. Of course I cannot. I see only the pond, the light, the soft blur of my breath against the glass. Still, the knowing comforts me more than the seeing ever could. There is an old book tucked into the shelf above my desk, a collection of essays on quantum entanglement, and the dream of finding a theory that could stitch the large and the small together without tearing at the edges of certainty. I take it down, feeling the rough cloth of its cover, remembering how my father once read to me from these pages, his voice calm as a lullaby, even when the words tangled themselves into knots too dense for a child to hold. He would pause sometimes to look at me over the rim of his glasses and ask, "Do you see it, Ellie? Not with your eyes, with your mind." I never knew how to answer then, but now, standing here barefoot with dawn sliding through the window, I think perhaps I do see it, or at least I sense where to look. I set the book down unopened. I do not need its pages this morning. The kettle hums to life in the kitchen below, the same old promise of warmth that so often tricks me into believing the world can be boiled down to water and heat and steam rising then vanishing. As the water warms, I stand at the counter tracing a fingertip along the pattern of the tile, feeling the small cracks where time has lifted the glaze in quiet rebellion. There is something I trust about these small signs of imperfection, more honest than the clean lines of my chalkboard lectures or the crisp print of scientific journals stacked beside my bed. The kettle clicks off with a shy sigh of relief. I pour the water into my cup, watching the swirl of heat lift for a moment, then disappear. Steam is nothing but scattered molecules drifting apart, yet it feels like more than that when it curls in the morning light like a tiny lesson in impermanence. I carry the mug back to the window and watch as the garden shifts into the full wakefulness of day. A bird settles on the edge of the pond, dips its beak, then flits away so quickly it might not have been there at all. I wonder if it notices the hidden speck, if the grass beneath its feet remembers the faint collision of something that fell from the sky without asking permission to exist. I wonder, too, if the pond holds it in its reflection, storing the memory in ripples that widen and fade long after the surface goes still. I sip the tea, finding it too hot then too cool within the same breath. Somewhere in the hedges, I catch the flicker of fur, the fox perhaps, or just my mind filling the gaps with what it wishes to see. The hum from last night lingers at the edges of my hearing, not a sound exactly, but a suggestion, a presence that folds itself around my thoughts like a gentle hand. I wonder if this is how the quantum world always speaks, not in thunder or revelation, but in the soft tremor of maybe the whisper of what if, the hush that asks me to lean closer and listen without expecting the comfort of an answer. Upstairs my desk waits, the notebook open, the pen resting across its spine, like a bridge between questions and what lies just beyond them. I tell myself I will write soon, that I will sit down and try to translate this soft hum into words. Or the afternoon settles around me like a patient animal, its breath warm and steady against my skin as I sit by the garden window, notebook balanced on my knees, pen hovering but not yet moving, the page waiting like a shallow pond for a stone that may or may not be dropped. I hear the faint hum of cars beyond the hedge, a reminder that the world spins on with or without my willingness to keep pace with it. Somewhere a dog barks twice, then falls silent, as if embarrassed by its own interruption. The garden holds the sun in gentle handfuls, light caught in the curl of ivy and the lean of drowsy rose stems. I wonder if the speck from the other night is still there, hidden beneath a stray leaf or pressed into the soil so deeply that even the roots do not suspect its presence. The thought makes my fingers itch to dig through the damp earth, but I do not move. I sit here instead, watching the play of shadow and sun, as if by simply observing I might coax a secret from hiding. The notebook on my lap opens its blankness to me, lines waiting for the right sequence of words, the right tremor of thought to settle into place. I think of the way my father would write sometimes in the old shed at the back of the garden, hunched over his battered desk, radio murmuring low static mixed with the crackle of classical music. He would scribble calculations on scraps of envelope, backs of receipts, the margins of gardening catalogs, and when I asked him what he was doing, he would tap the side of his head and say, mapping the hidden places. Ellie, every question needs a map, even if you never find the treasure. I used to laugh at that, but now I feel the weight of those maps, the way they hang like soft ghosts in the corners of this house. Sometimes I think I hear them whispering when the pipes sigh or when the floorboards shift beneath my feet. It is strange how the ordinary and the impossible can stand so close to each other, like two people leaning together in conversation. The kettle clicks in the kitchen, but I ignore it. I am not ready for its small warmth, not yet. My thoughts drift instead to the lecture hall with its rows of restless minds waiting for me to reveal how the world curls in on itself at the smallest scales, how particles slip through certainty like fish through a net. I wonder if they believe me when I stand there explaining that an electron can be here and there, that time can bend itself into loops, that the universe is not built from solid bricks, but from questions strung together like beads on a fraying thread. Maybe they do, maybe they only pretend to understand, scribbling half-formed notes they will forget by morning, but I hope one or two carry the wonder home, tuck it under their pillows, let it slip into their dreams, the way my father's words once slipped into mine. I set the pen to the page, write a single word light. It hovers on the paper, small and lonely. I think of photons traveling vast distances through the emptiness of space brushing against dust and gas weaving through gravity wells, carrying with them the memory of where they were born. I wonder if the light that touches my garden now has ever touched anything else, if it remembers the inside of a star, the edge of a comet's tail, the cold dark between worlds. The thought makes my chest tighten in a way that feels close to longing, but softer. I press the pen down again, draw a line beneath the word, as if underlining might anchor it, might make it more real, but nothing about light is truly anchored. It is motion, it is suggestion, it is the messenger that never stops moving yet never forgets where it came from. Sometimes at night, when I cannot sleep, I imagine following a single photon backward, tracing its path from my window through the layers of atmosphere, past the moon, slipping between planets, weaving through the swirl of a galaxy, until it finds itself at the mouth of a sun, bright and burning and impossibly far. I imagine asking it what it has seen, if it feels the ache of distance, or if it knows only the joy of flight. The garden shifts as a breeze wanders in, stirring the tall grass near the fence. A dragonfly hovers just beyond the glass, wings flickering with tiny rainbows that vanish as quickly as they appear. It reminds me that beauty is often nothing more than the angle of light against the curve of something fragile. I wonder if the dragonfly senses the strangeness beneath its wings, the hidden flicker of that fallen speck, or if it simply lives by the rule of warmth and water, hunger and rest, its world complete in its simplicity. I envy that sometimes the clean hunger, the direct line from need to answer, no equations to solve, no hidden places to map. I close the notebook, rested on the windowsill, and let my eyes drift shut just for a moment. The garden hums a soft chorus of leaf and wind and distant birdsong. My thoughts drift again to my father. I see him in his chair near the pond, hat tipped back, eyes half closed, as if he might fall asleep, but never does. He is watching the play of light on water, the slow circles, the ripples that fade into quiet. He catches me looking and smiles, the kind of smile that does not ask for anything in return. I open my eyes to find the garden still here, the pond holding the afternoon sky in a trembling mirror, the breeze teasing the tips of the hedges. I think about going outside, about pressing my bare feet into the grass, about kneeling at the edge of the pond, dipping my fingers into the water, feeling for something that does not wish to be found. But I stay where I am, hands folded over the notebook, the pen resting against my wrist. The hum is still there, softer now, more like a thought than a sound. It slips beneath my skin, settles behind my ribs, reminds me that the world is not solid ground, but shifting possibility, that certainty is only a kindness we tell ourselves when the sky grows too large to hold. I rise from the chair, letting the notebook fall, closed its pages, holding my single word and the weight of everything I did not write. I step into the hallway and let the house lead me to the back door. The latch clicks open with a soft complaint, and the garden air greets me cool against my bare arms. I stand on the worn path for a long moment, listening to the hush that lives here, the quiet that holds the memory of the speck of my father, of every word I have ever spoken into the dark. I step forward, feeling the earth steady beneath me, each blade of grass, each stone beneath my toes, a reminder that even in the strangeness, even in the drift, there is still this, the soft certainty of my own breath, the warmth of sunlight on my shoulders, the hush of a world that dreams through me. As I stand here wondering how far the light has traveled to find me, how many secrets it carries, how gently it asks me to listen, I stand there for longer than I mean to, letting the garden hold me in its quiet arms, the breeze lifting strands of hair against my cheek, the sun resting its pale warmth across my shoulders. The path beneath my feet is worn in places where I have walked this same line from door to pond countless times, as if my steps alone could carve a memory into the soil. I move slowly toward the pond, stopping once to crouch and touch a patch of clover, pressing my palm flat against the cool green. The tiny leaves shift under my skin as if to remind me how many hidden lives tremble Just below the surface, the faint hum from the other night seems to pulse up through the ground, meeting my hand. Halfway, it is not a sound, not exactly, but a presence that drifts between thought and heartbeat. I imagine for a moment that if I could press my ear to the earth, I might hear the murmur of roots sharing secrets with the speck that fell unseen. The air is sweet with the faint smell of damp soil and new growth somewhere. A bird calls sharp and quick, and then another answers from deeper in the hedge. I stand again, brushing earth from my palm, feeling its grit against my fingertips, proof that I am still here, still solid, even if my mind drifts toward places where certainty has always refused to settle. I circle the pond slowly, noting how the water catches the shifting sky clouds drifting in pieces across its trembling surface. A few stray leaves float near the far edge. Small boats adrift on a quiet ocean. I kneel at the bank, careful not to let my shoes sink into the mud, and watch my reflection hover there, layered over the pale shapes of stones and the dark promise of deeper water. I wonder how deep it really is. I have never measured it, never needed to. The pond holds what it wants to hold, and the rest slides off into the soil, or the roots, or the soft forgotten spaces beneath the garden. I reach out and touch the surface with my fingertips, breaking my reflection into scattered ripples. The water is cold enough to tighten the skin of my knuckles, but I do not pull away right away. I watch how the ripples widen, fade into one another, until the surface settles again, pretending nothing was disturbed. I think of particles colliding in the dark of space, brushing past one another without ever truly touching, each one a messenger carrying a question from one corner of the universe to another. Sometimes I feel like that too, drifting through lectures, through nights at the kitchen table, through this garden, carrying the same small question in my chest. Like a stone I stand and look up. The sky has cleared a little, a single trail of cloud stretching thin across the blue, as if some invisible hand drew it there to remind me how easily a mark can be made, and just as easily undone. I remember my father telling me about cosmic rays, how high-energy particles from distant galaxies fall through our atmosphere every moment, invisible messengers that strike the earth, and sometimes our own bodies, leaving tiny trails of ionization we never feel, but which shape us in ways we may never understand. He liked to say that every breath, every heartbeat was a conversation with something impossibly far away. I did not understand him then, not really, but now, standing here with my feet pressed into the soft edge of the pond, I think maybe I do. I close my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of sunlight against my eyelids, the damp curl of air rising from the water. When I open them again, a dragonfly schemes upon its wings, catching light in flashes too quick to hold. I follow its path until it lifts away toward the hedge, vanishing into the tangle of green, where I know the fox sometimes sleeps. When the world is too loud, I imagine the fox curled there. Now one eye open to watch the slow drift of afternoon, waiting for dusk, when it will slip through the fence and trace invisible lines through the neighborhood, a quiet shape moving between gardens and discarded wrappers and the secrets we leave behind. I wonder if it has ever seen me standing here, if it ever pauses to wonder about the strange creature who wakes at impossible hours to watch the stars, or the pond, or the slow bloom of frost on the garden path. I step back from the water and make my way toward the old shed tucked at the far corner of the garden, its door slightly ajar where the wood is warped over years of rain and neglect. The hinges sigh when I push it open. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of old paper and rust, and a faint sweetness of dried leaves that have blown in through the crack beneath the door. My father's desk still sits beneath the small window, dust gathered and drifts across its surface. An old lamp leans at an angle, its cord wrapped twice around the base. I trace my finger through the dust, leaving a single clean line that catches the afternoon light. I sit in the old chair, its wood creaking under my weight, and imagine him here, head bent over some scrap of paper, pencil tapping against his teeth as he chased a thought across the page. I look at the shelves still crowded with boxes of yellowed notes, jars filled with screws and bolts, and tiny parts of machines that never quite became anything larger. Sometimes I think he loved the beginnings more than the endings, the thrill of the first spark of an idea before the work of proving it could flatten it into something ordinary. I pull open a drawer and find it filled with brittle rubber bands, a handful of faded photographs, a rusted tin where he kept spare batteries for the old radio. I turn one of the photographs over. It is of him standing near the pond, a younger version of me at his side, our shadows tangled together on the grass. He is pointing at something just out of frame, his face half in shadow, half in sunlight. Even in the stillness of the picture, he looks like he is waiting for an answer that might never come. I slip the photograph into my pocket and sit back, closing my eyes, letting the smell of old paper and dust wrap around me. I think about how much of him is still here, folded into the corners of this shed, the lines he drew, the thoughts he left half finished, the way he believed that the universe would always lean toward the curious if only you listen long enough and ask the right. I stand in the doorway for a long breath, feeling the weight of the afternoon settling deeper into my bones, as if the sun has pressed a quiet thumbprint there behind my ribs. I wonder if the house feels me hesitate, if the floor remembers the shape of my steps, the slow way I linger on the threshold. When thought pulls harder than routine, I slip inside, closing the door behind me. The faint latch click sounds louder than it should in the hush that waits beyond the kitchen. Tiles are cool under my feet as I cross to the sink and rinse the dust from my hands, watching the small swirl of grit slip away down the drain, a tiny departure unnoticed by anyone but me. I fill the kettle again, out of habit, though I am not really thirsty. The weight of the water steady in my grip, a reminder that some things remain ordinary, no matter how wide my thoughts stretch. I set it on the stove, listen for the low hum as it begins its quiet work. Steam soon, sigh soon, warmth against my face. I drift to the small table where a stack of mail sits, unopened flyers and bills and polite notices about things that hardly matter in the hush of this house. I shuffle through them more for the feeling of paper under my fingertips than for any real purpose. One envelope is addressed in looping handwriting, not familiar, but not strange either. I turn it over once, twice, set it aside unopened for now, letting it rest beneath the weight of a coffee cup that has held nothing but old tea stains for days. The kettle clicks softly, a tiny punctuation. I pour the water, watch it swirl around the edges of the mug, darkening the tea bag into something more than dried leaves. I think of how the heat releases the flavor, how particles break free, how the molecules drift until they taste like something we call comfort. I carry the mug back to the window, where the garden leans close, the pond now a sheet of slow-moving gold beneath the late sun. The fox does not appear, but I imagine its shape anyway, tail brushing against the wild ivy, nose lifting to test the coming dusk. I sip the tea, though it scalds my tongue slightly, a small sting to remind me I am here, that my body holds its own truths even when my mind drifts elsewhere. I wonder how far the speck has traveled within the garden, if it has nested beneath a stone or clung to a root, if it hums quietly to the worms and beetles that shape the soil. I imagine it shifting, gently pulsing its tiny message into the dark, damp corridors beneath my feet, a secret so small it needs no witness but mine. The steam curls from the mug, drifting toward the glass, then vanishing before it can leave a mark. I think of all the times I have stood here in this same spot, watching rain or snow or the slow shiver of dawn breaking against the hedge. Sometimes it feels like the window is a thin border between the possible and the impossible, between what I can hold and what slips through my fingers, no matter how tightly I try to keep it. My father used to stand here, two mug in hand, eyes half closed, as if he could see through the glass into something I was too young to understand. He never explained, not fully, not in the way textbooks do. He spoke in small riddles and half-truths and questions that were answers in disguise. I asked him once if he believed the universe could think, if all these drifting particles and waves might arrange themselves into something that remembers us. He smiled, tapped his temple, said, "Maybe we are the way it remembers itself." I did not understand then. I thought it was just another one of his gentle tricks to keep me wondering. But now the question sits in my chest, a warm stone, waiting for my hands to shape it into something that might fit on paper. I set the mug down, trace a finger along the cold glass. The garden does not flinch. It offers its shifting mirror freely. The hedge holds the last light carefully, a gate that never closes completely. I remember the notebook waiting upstairs, its single word still patient. On the page light, a word that asks for more than explanation, a word that wants a story to hold it steady. I turn away from the window, move through the hallway, my footsteps soft against the wooden floorboards. My reflection flickers in the old mirror by the stairs, a shape I almost recognize, someone who looks like she might carry answers in her pockets, but who mostly carries questions instead. The stairs creak beneath my weight as I climb, each step a reminder that this house has carried generations of small wanderings, my father's tread, my grandmother's careful rise and descent, the echo of my own feet layered over theirs. Like a quiet chord, the study door stands half open, as if it knows I will come back eventually. The telescope by the window angles its patient eye toward the evening sky. I sit at the desk, notebook open, pen balanced between my fingers. The air tastes faintly of dust and old, with the smell of a house that has always held its breath, waiting for words. I lower the pen to the page, let it rest just above the word I wrote days ago, or maybe only hours. It is hard to measure time in this hush around me. I think about how light travels, how it bends, how it slips past the edges of things we believe are solid. I wonder if the light remembers each curve, each collision, if it carries all its past moments in the way a dream carries the shape of the dreamer. I write another word below the first wave, the curve that holds the pulse, the motion that never settles into stillness. I pause, listening to the quiet hum that seems to live inside the walls, or maybe inside my own chest, the same hush that followed me from the garden, from the pond, from the fox, that does not appear, but always lingers. I think about the garden soil, the hidden speck, the weight particles drift unnoticed, carrying old heat, old questions, old possibilities. I wonder if the speck chose this place, if choosing is even the right word. Maybe it simply arrived, like all things do, finding a quiet corner to hum itself into being. I lift my eyes to the telescope, lean forward until my reflection goes across the glass. I do not adjust it, I do not peer through it yet. Instead, I watch how the sky outside darkens inch by careful inch, blue bruising into indigo, stars not yet visible, but waiting. I imagine the photons slipping through space, aimed at my waiting window, crossing distances I cannot name, carrying the shape of their origin folded inside their flight. I wonder if they ever collide with the speck in the garden, if their paths meet in some soft, unmeasured way. A greeting too quiet to hear. I press the pen to the page again, sketch a line that curves gently, then another, crossing it, a small map of thought, a reminder that not all paths are straight, that sometimes what drifts away circles back, carrying a secret in its trembling wake. I close the note. I linger by the telescope longer than I mean to, fingertips resting lightly on the cold brass, as if it might hum back to life beneath my touch. The house behind me is wrapped in its evening hush, the same hush that drifts through the garden, slips beneath the doors, settles into the walls, and waits. I think about lifting the scope, adjusting it toward the first brave stars that have begun to pierce the soft blue above the hedge, but I do not move yet. Instead, I stand in the gentle twilight, letting my thoughts drift the way light drifts without asking permission. The notebook lies closed on the desk, its pages holding my few words, like seeds pressed into dark soil, waiting for warmth, for water, for something quiet and patient enough to coax them into bloom. I imagine my father sitting where I stand now years ago, before the hinges rusted, and the paint peeled, before the garden surrendered its neat borders to ivy and moss, and foxes with nowhere else to go. He would stand so still. I remember watching him from the doorway, too young to understand the gravity of stillness, too restless to stand beside him without asking why. He would rest his hand on the scope as if it were a living thing, as if some pulse traveled through it from the depths of the sky down the long brass tube into his palm, into his chest. Now, I wonder what he felt in those moments, if he heard the hush I hear now, if the hum that seems to slip through the cracks in the night once whispered its secrets into his waiting bones. The sky deepened by degrees, the soft bruise of dusk dissolving into velvet. I lift the telescope at last, steadying its tripod legs on the worn floorboards. The creak of wood beneath my feet reminds me how small this room truly is, how large it becomes when the lens opens onto the vastness just beyond the glass. I tilt the scope, gently adjusting the angle, until the single star I have chosen blinks into view, a pinprick of old light, older than my father, older than this house, older than the soft warmth of my breath fogging the eyepiece. I imagine the photon that reaches my eye now began its journey before this street had a name, before this garden had roses, before my grandmother stood in this same yard trimming the hedge into careful lines that have since unraveled into wild green curls. I lean closer, the eyepiece cool against my brow, my heart steady in my chest. The hum seems closer now, not a sound exactly, but a presence woven through the quiet, a thread that tugs at the edge of my thoughts, reminding me how very thin the boundary is between what I see and what I only sense through some soft place inside me that has no words for certainty. The star wavers just slightly, not because it moves, but because the air between us does a restless dance of heat and drift, bending the light into a shiver that makes my eyes water. I pull back, blinking against the sting, lift my gaze to the bare window, where the star hovers on its own, unbothered by my small attempt to hold it still. I wonder what it would say. If it could speak, if it would whisper something simple, or something so vast I would never sleep again. Maybe it would say nothing at all. Maybe it has no need for the language of those who watch from far below. The garden hums its own language, the pond catching the star's reflection like a thin coin flicked into its shallow belly. The fox, if it is there, watches without watching, content to let the night wrap its secrets around his narrow shoulders. I stand there for a while longer, the telescope steady, the house behind me breathing its slow old breath, the garden waiting. I feel my own breath slow to match it. I close my eyes behind the soft curtain of my lids. The star lingers, burned into the dark like a promise. I step away from the scope, let it stand sentinel by the window, its brass spine leaning gently toward whatever quiet it has always waited to gather. I slip back down the stairs, careful not to break the hush, the kettle on the stove, the mug beside the sink, the envelope I left unopened hours ago, waiting under the empty cup. I sit at the table, the wood cool under my forearms, fingers tracing the faint scratches my father's rings once left when he tapped out a rhythm. While thinking his thoughts, I slide the envelope free from its small prison, turn it over once more, studying the handwriting that looks both strange and familiar. I break the seal, slowly pulling the folded page free. The paper is thin, almost translucent, words pressed in dark ink that curves and dips in places where the writer hesitated or pressed too hard, a habit of someone who wants the page to know it has been chosen. The letter is brief, but its few lines open something wide in my chest. A colleague from the university writing, not to ask about overdue lectures or tangled exam timetables, but to share a rumor, a mention of a paper from decades ago, one my father wrote, never published, left in some half-forgotten archive beneath layers of other small, forgotten things. They found it by accident, they say, tucked in a box of lab notes that never found their way to any library shelf. A piece about particle drift, about small collisions in low orbit, about the way a single speck of cosmic debris might shift an entire trajectory in ways too delicate to measure. I feel my mouth curve into a shape that is not quite a smile as I read and read again. My father never mentioned it, or maybe he did in his own way, in the way he talked about the universe brushing against itself in quiet nudges that left no visible mark but still changed everything. I think of the speck that may or may not rest beneath my garden hedge, or in the pond, or in the hush that moves through this old house. Maybe it is not a thing that needs to be found. Maybe it has always been here, humming along the grain of the floorboards, the rusted hinges of the shed, the cold brass of the telescope, a gentle pulse that reminds me to keep watching, to keep asking, to stand in doorways and garden paths and open windows and listen for the drift of light across the empty spaces. I fold the letter carefully, slip it back into its thin paper sleeve. My hands rest for a moment flat on the table, palms pressing into the familiar wood as if the grain might press back. I breathe once, twice, feel the hum settle behind my ribs. Not a question, not an answer, but a small permission to stay curious. I stand again, carry my cooling mug to the window, lifted to my lips, though the tea is tepid now, only a ghost of warmth, but still it tastes like something that belongs to me. I look out at the garden, the pond, the hedge, the place where the fox might slip through when the world feels quiet enough to welcome its soft padded feet. I think of my father, his desk, his scribbled notes, the hidden paper that drifted unseen for so long, waiting for someone to notice its gentle weight. I lean my forehead against the glass. The night deepens until the garden outside my window is more shape than color, shadows softening the edges of hedges and pond until the familiar paths disappear into a single hush that feels both empty and full at once. I stand there a while longer, forehead pressed lightly to the glass, feeling the faint chill seep into my skin, a reminder that this pane of glass is all that separates my quiet kitchen from the open drift of night air somewhere. The fox moves unseen, the hush parting gently around its slender body. The grass remembers the brush of fur, the small press of paws as it slips between fence slats and hedges, a quiet shape carrying secrets it has no words for. Sometimes I think I envy that certainty, the instinct that guides it from garden to garden without the weight of wondering why. I breathe out a slow mist onto the window, watch it bloom and vanish, a brief echo of the warmth inside me touching the cold outside. I think of the letter, folded now on the table, its edges already softened by my thumb, tracing the curve of the paper, as if I could wear it smooth enough to slip it into memory without it catching my breath each time I think of it. My father's name on that half-forgotten page, tucked away all these years, as if it were waiting for me to stand here decades later wondering whether the speck in my garden is part of his question or part of mine. I pull back from the glass, letting the hush fill the small distance between my skin and the cold pane. The kettle hums again on the stove, a habit more than a need. I pour another cup, letting the steam rise into my face, the scent of tea earthy and grounding, a thin line tying me to the ordinary. As my thoughts stretch outward, I carry the mug into the hallway. Each floorboard remembers my step, gives a gentle creak in greeting as I pass. The living room waits in its soft darkness, the couch draped in a worn blanket, the armrest where my father used to rest his elbow as he read, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in the hush of his own thoughts. I sink into the couch, pull the blanket over my knees, the mug warm between my palms. I can almost see him across from me, eyes half hidden behind his glasses, a pencil tapping gently against the open pages of a book. He would look up, catch my gaze, and smile, as if to say, see, you are part of this too, you always were. I take a sip, let the warmth pool behind my ribs. The clock on the wall ticks softly, counting out seconds that stretch and bend in this late hour. I think about how time behaves in the quantum world, how it is not the strict line we pretended to be how it can loop slip pause, how a particle might linger in 2 moments at once, neither here nor there both, until we ask it to choose. I wonder if my father knew, when he wrote that paper, that it would drift out of sight, like a particle unobserved, that it would wait for my eyes to find it again, completing a loop that neither of us planned. I imagine him at his desk in the shed, the small lamp haloing his hands as he wrote the night, pressing at the window, the hush leaning in close, as if to listen. I want to ask him if he believed in the speck, if he thought it might carry its own small memory, its own faint hum folded into the soil, waiting for a hand, or a thought, or a breath to stir it awake. But the questions pool inside me unsaid, so I sit here, mug in hand, blanket warm across my knees, listening to the house settle its soft sighs through the walls, the distant groan of the pipes, the creak of beams, remembering each winter, each summer, each breath that has filled these rooms. When the mug is empty, I set it down on the low table beside the letter. I pick up the letter again, run my fingertip over the ink, feel the tiny ridges where the pen pressed the paper, as if the shape of the words might reveal more than the words themselves. I close my eyes, imagine the archive, where it slept all these years, boxed in the dark among other forgotten scraps of thought. I see the dust, the faint smell of old cardboard, the quiet that grows between pages no one turns. I wonder who found it, whose hand brushed against the edges, whose eyes paused over my father's name, whose curiosity stirred the paper back to life and sent it to my door like a message in a bottle washing ashore. When I was ready to see it, I stand again, blanket sliding to the couch. The house seems to hold its breath as I move through the hallway back to the stairs, each step a soft echo carrying me up to the small study where the telescope stands guard over the night sky. I flick on the old lamp, its glow pools across the notebook still closed on the desk, the spine a thin line between what I have written and what waits for me to name it. I sit, the chair creaks under my weight, a familiar welcome. I open the notebook, read the single word light, then the next wave, and I think how both are true, how each word leans into the other, how they ask not for explanation, but for a listening that does not rush. I pick up the pen, its weight familiar, my fingers fitting into the grooves worn by years of small thoughts and half-finished questions. I write, drift, the letters loose, easy, no force behind them, just the shape of my thoughts finding the page, lightweight drift. I whisper the words aloud to no one, to the hush that leans closer now, wrapping my shoulders in its invisible shawl. Outside the stars gather in quiet constellations, their lines imagined, but no less true for being unseen. I picture the photons again, slipping from star to star, brushing against dust, gliding past wandering specks of ancient rock, folding their journey into a single soft push that finds my garden pond, my hedge, my skin. I wonder if I am drifting too, if my own small weight shifts something in the dark folds of the garden, where the speck might still rest, or drift, or hum, waiting for me to pause long enough to hear it. I close the notebook, my eyes tracing the window, where the glass holds the faint ghost of my reflection layered over the distant sky. The telescope tilts toward Orion, a shape I learned to name when I was small, my father's voice low beside me, his arm pointing up. See Ellie, the hunter, the belt, the shoulder, the sword. I remember the shiver of cold night air, the soft press of his hand on my shoulder, steady, warm, real. I stand and lean toward the window, pressing my palm flat against the cool glass. I feel the hush meet me there. The garden below is just darkness now, except for the small shine where the pond catches the smallest scraps of starlight. No sign of the fox, but I know it is there somewhere, or will be later, moving as it always does, certain without needing to name its certainty. I lower my hand, breathe out the glass fogs, a thin bloom that fades almost before I can see it go. I turn off the morning, drifts in slow as a breath. I do not remember drawing a soft light that slips across the ceiling, then down the walls, until it finds my half-open eyes. I lie still for a moment, my hand resting on the edge of the blanket, feeling the pulse of my own heartbeat echoing against the hush that holds the house together. I listen for the sounds that mark the day beginning, the low hum of the pipes, the muted creak of the stairs as they settle into their shape again, the faint rustle of leaves beyond the window where the hedge leans toward the kitchen wall, as if to remind the bricks that nothing stays untouched forever. When I finally rise, the floor is cool beneath my feet, grounding me in the simple truth that for all the drifting thoughts that circle my mind, there is still this, the weight of my body, the soft chill of wood against skin, the quiet promise of tea waiting in the cupboard. I move through the hallway, trailing my fingertips along the wall, tracing the faint seams in the paint, the hairline cracks that speak of winters past, of damp days, and the slow breath of the house expanding and shrinking with each change of season. In the kitchen, I fill the kettle again, the water pooling steady into the metal belly, the sound oddly comforting, a small certainty that repeats each day whether I stand here to hear it or not. I set it on the stove, watch the faint curl of steam begin to rise before the water even thinks of boiling. Outside the garden waits the pond, barely visible through the pale sheet of early mist that has settled across the grass. Like a secret, I pause at the window, my mug warm between my palms, eyes tracing the line where hedge meets sky, where the old fence holds back the world beyond our patch of soft wildness. Sometimes I think the fence is less a barrier than an invitation for the fox to slip through, for the wind to carry stray seeds into the corners where they sprout in places my grandmother would have scolded me for letting grow untidy. I wonder if the speck is still there, if it has drifted deeper into the soil or clung to a root or slipped between water molecules in the pond, waiting for the right breath of air to lift it back toward the sky. I sip my tea, careful of its heat, and feel the warmth bloom against my tongue. The steam curls against my cheek, a brief touch softer than a hand, but real enough to hold me here for another moment. I think about the letter folded now inside the old recipe tin on the shelf tucked there, as if keeping it close will keep the questions it carries from drifting too far. I wonder what else my father tucked away in drawers and boxes in the shed behind the garden, in the attic where dust settles like a second skin on memories that do not ask to be found. I picture him there in the garden, boots pressed into the damp soil, eyes lifted toward a sky that has forgotten every name we ever gave it, his hands in his pockets, a pencil behind one ear, the hum of a thought slipping through him so softly that even he did not notice it at first. I move to the back door, turn the old brass handle, step out onto the worn stone path. The air greets me cool and damp, brushing against my bare arms, as if the mist itself wants to remind me that it too drifts, that it too carries pieces of what was once solid, now softened into something that cannot be held. The grass is wet under my feet, the pond holds its mist like a breath. It is not a large pond, barely wider than my outstretched arms, yet it feels vast in this hush, its surface still except for the faint ripple where a leaf touches the edge. I crouch there, fingertips brushing the cold water, feeling how it pulls away from my skin as if it knows I do not belong within its quiet. The fox does not appear this morning, but I see its prints near the far edge, soft indentations pressed into the damp earth, proof of its passing, the shape of its drift through my night. While I lay dreaming of things I can almost remember, but not quite, I wonder what it knows of me, if anything, if it pauses when it sees the faint glow from my window, if it stands there for a heartbeat, deciding whether to slip closer or turn back into the hedge where secrets stay folded in fur and shadow. I stand again, wipe my damp fingers against my sleeve, and look back at the house, its windows catching the new sun in pale glints, the roof lined with moss that spreads a little more each year, a quiet rebellion of green that reminds me no matter how carefully we build, something always finds a way to soften the edges. Inside the study waits the telescope, the notebook, the pen resting where I left it, as if no time has passed at all, but I stay outside a little longer, breathing the mist, watching the garden shift in slow wakes of wind. The old rose is heavy with dew, the ivy pulling itself upward around the fence post. Patient and determined, I close my eyes and imagine the tiny speck humming there in the soil, a quiet pulse that answers the hum I carry behind my ribs, both so small, neither needing to be seen to be real. When I go back inside, the kettle hums its own soft tune, as if reminding me that for all my drifting there is warmth waiting. When I am ready, I pour another mug, stand by the window again, the garden slowly brightening under the slow push of morning light, the mist lifting in gentle threads until the pond shows its shallow depths again, the leaf now drifting further toward the center, where it will settle or sink or wait for the next breeze to set it. Moving, I carry the mug upstairs, each step slow, steady, the floorboards sighing in their familiar way. The study greets me with its soft dust, its smell of old wood and paper, the telescope still angled toward a place in the sky where the stars have already vanished into daylight, but their memory lingers in the brass and glass of the scope itself. I sit at the desk, open the notebook, read the words I wrote, light wave drift, 3 small truths that do not try to be anything more than there. I add another word, shift, the quiet slide from one place to another, the way water moves, the way thought slides from memory to possibility, the way a speck slips from sky to garden to soil to pond. I do not try to explain it, not yet, perhaps not ever. I only write the word, let it rest beside the others like a pebble dropped into calm water. I listen to the hum that fills the room now, and not from the pipes or the kettle or the distant traffic beyond the fence, but from somewhere closer, somewhere inside. The soft hush that reminds me that answers are not always what we think they should be. Sometimes they are only. The day passes without hurry, drifting through the old rooms of this house, like sunlight slipping through a loose curtain, each hour folding into the next so gently that I hardly notice the shift, until I find myself standing in the kitchen again, kettle humming on the stove, a second or third cup of tea warming my hands, while outside the garden leans into the soft promise of late afternoon, the pond catching the sky in broken ripples where a breeze teases the water into small shifting patterns. I watch from the window, one hand resting against the cool glass, my reflection layered over the pale blue above the hedge, my face half hidden behind steam and sunlight. Sometimes I wonder how many hours I have spent standing here, mug in hand, eyes half focused on a patch of ivy, or the curl of a fox's tail, or the shimmer of water bending light into shapes that feel almost like answers. My father used to say that we stare at the same things again and again, not because we expect them to change, but because we hope they might reveal something we missed the last time, a hint, a flicker, a soft confession that this world is more willing to speak if only we learn how to listen. I take a slow sip, tasting the faint bitterness of leaves steeped too long, the warmth still comforting even as it cools. I close my eyes for a moment, letting the hum that has lingered since the speck fell settle back into its usual corner behind my ribs. Not a noise, not exactly, more like the memory of a voice I have never heard but somehow recognize. I wonder if the speck is truly in the garden, or if it only exists now in the shape of my thoughts, a tiny question folded into the damp soil of my mind, waiting for the right moment to push up through all the quiet I carry. I set the mug down, run my thumb along the rim, feel the smooth edge catch against the small chip near the handle, a flaw I have traced 100 times before. It feels honest the way small imperfections do, proof that this is real, that I am here standing barefoot on old tiles, breathing steam and sunlight into a house that remembers every breath I take. I drift to the back door, open it with a soft press of my palm, the hinges sighing their familiar greeting. The garden air meets me cool and damp, even in the warmth of afternoon. The path is scattered with small leaves that have broken free from the hedge, their thin veins catching the light like threads of gold. I stoop to pick one up, hold it to the sun, watch the way it glows, fragile and certain at Once I place it back where it fell, as if it might choose its own resting place better than I ever could. The pond waits ahead, the water clearer now, the morning mist burned off by the steady breath of sun. The surface shows me the sky's scattered clouds drifting at a pace that feels both lazy and unstoppable. I crouch at the edge, touch the water. With the tips of my fingers watch the ripples widen and fade. I remember my father doing the same, standing here, boots pressed into the soft mud, hand brushing the surface, as if the pond might answer a question he did not say aloud. Maybe it did, maybe the answer was always there in the slow circles of light, in the hush that gathers beneath the lily pads, in the quiet space between thought and touch. I lean back on my heels, let my eyes close, listen to the small sounds that make this place feel alive. The distant hum of a bee, the faint sigh of wind pulling at the ivy, the low creak of a branch settling its own small weight. I think of the notebook waiting upstairs, the words I left, their light wave drift, shift, small steps across a thought that has no map, no clear ending, only this soft permission to keep moving, to keep pressing my fingers to the surface of what I do not yet understand. I stand again, brush the dirt from my palms, wander along the edge of the garden, where the fence leans slightly under the patient pull of ivy. Here and there, the wood is splintered, softened by years of rain and sun and the quiet push of roots. I run my hand along the rough grain, feel the warmth caught there from the day's sun, tiny heat stored in weathered wood. I pause where the fence opens into the small space behind the shed, a place overgrown with tangled weeds and low brambles, a place I have not bothered to tame. I like it wild, the way my father did. He would stand here too, in this hidden patch, looking up at the same sky, hands in his pockets, thoughts drifting like seeds on the wind. Sometimes I wonder if he stood here the night the speck fell, if he somehow called it down with the soft gravity of his wondering, if he left it for me to find when the garden and the hush and my own breath were ready. I kneel there now, palms pressed into the cool dirt, the smell of damp earth rising to meet me. I do not dig, though the thought flickers through me like a quick spark. Instead, I rest my hands flat, feel the pulse of the ground beneath me, the hum finding its echo in the steady beat of my heart. I imagine the speck humming too, a note so small it slips between molecules, folds itself into root and worm and water, until it is everywhere and nowhere at once. I open my eyes, let the world tilt gently back into shape. The shed to my right, the fence leaning in the garden, waiting, its secrets tucked into shadows and small leaves. I stand, brush the soil from my skin, step back onto the worn path that leads toward the house. The sun leans lower now, a soft gold pooling through branches, catching on the edges of the window panes. When I step inside, the air greets me, warmer than the breeze outside, filled with the faint smell of tea and old books, and something that belongs only to this place, this house, that has held my questions, my father's questions, the soft hum of what drifts in unseen. I carry the last of the warmth upstairs. The floorboards welcome me in their quiet way. The telescope waits, angled slightly toward the window, where dusk begins its slow coloring of the sky. I sit at the desk, open the notebook, run my finger along the edge of the page. The pen rests beside it, patient as ever. I pick it up, let the tip hover over the last word, shift, then write another hum, the small sound that has followed me from garden to pond to fence to room, the reminder that nothing stays silent, not really, that even the quiet carries a voice if you lean close enough to hear it. I close the notebook, not because I am finished, but because for now the page is full enough. The window shows me a sky that holds no answers, only the soft drift of night, returning the first stars blinking awake, as if to say, we are here, we have always been here. We hum too in the spaces you do not see, in the spaces you dream. I sit there for a while, listening to the hush that gathers around me, the hush that is not empty at all, but filled with a small patient promise that the speck in the garden, the drift in my chest, the quiet in this house. Night comes gently again, slipping in through the thin edges of the window, where the warmth of the day still clings to the glass before giving itself up to the slow hush of dusk. The garden folds itself into shadow in patient layers, pond, hedge, fence, all softened into a single shape that breathes with the quiet certainty of things that know how to rest. I sit by the window watching the last strands of light fade into a deeper blue, a color that feels more honest than any bright noon sky. This blue holds secrets. It holds the memory of the sun folded carefully into the hush. I imagine the fox out there moving softly through the ivy, its body a ripple against the fence line, invisible but certain. The garden keeps its own hours, its own small drift of stories that never need to be spoken aloud. I press my palm to the window glass, feel the faint chill blooming through the warmth of my skin, a gentle reminder that inside and outside are only separate when I say they are. I lift my hand back to my lap, look down at the notebook open beside me, the words on the page catching the lamplight just enough to make them seem alive. Light wave, drift, shift, hum, each one a small anchor dropped into the wide pool of thought, each one sending out its own circles that brush up against each other in soft greeting. I remember my father's voice telling me that a question is not something to answer, but something to follow, like a soft trail through a quiet wood where the path appears only when you trust it to appear. I trace the last word with the tip of my pen, hum, and then I write another memory, because that is what this feels like now, this hush, this speck, this garden, all a memory of something that has not yet happened but already knows my name. I close the notebook for a moment, let it rest, my eyes drift to the telescope standing watch by the window, its brass spine catching the faintest slip of starlight that has already begun to show above the hedge. I wonder if my father ever stood here as I do now, wondering if the light that slips through the glass could carry not just information, but remembrance, if each photon holds the smallest piece of everything it ever touched, brushing against my face now to remind me that somewhere out there is the shape of what he once saw, once dreamed, once wrote down in the margin of a page that waited decades for my hands to unfold it. I stand and move closer to the scope, adjust its angle until the lens finds that same first star, the one that flickers above the garden like an old friend, its light crossing distances I can barely name, distances that stretch so far they bend under their own weight. Yet here it is, a pinprick on my glass, an old truth made visible by my willingness to look. I lean in until the eyepiece rests against my brow, the world narrowing down to a single shimmer, surrounded by the hush of everything I cannot see. The star wavers slightly, the air between us restless, bending the thin line of light until it dances just enough to remind me it is not fixed, it is never still, it is always drifting even when I pretend otherwise. I breathe out slowly, watch the small fog of it catch the edge of the scope before vanishing into the dark beyond my window. I pull back, wipe the faint print my forehead left against the cold brass, and let the star remain where it is, needing nothing from me but this brief moment of witness. I return to the desk, run my hand along the spine of the closed notebook, the grain of the cover warm beneath my palm, as if it too holds the memory of every thought I have let rest inside it. I think of the letter still tucked inside the tin in the kitchen, its edges softening, its words folding deeper into my mind each time I let them echo in the quiet. My father's question drifting through the hush that lingers here even when the kettle is quiet, the house sighing around me, the walls listening. I pick up the pen, press it back to the paper, open a new page, and write. Wait, the word feels right here, a counter to drift in. Anchor in the hush, the small gravity that holds a speck to the soil, that holds me to this chair, that keeps the fox pressed to the earth even as its body slips like a shadow through my garden at night. I write it again, smaller weight, not the heavy kind, not the burden, but the soft kind, the invisible tug that ties one thing to another, the pond to the rain, the root to the stone, the thought to the hush that breathes between my ribs. I pause, the pen balanced in my fingers, the window now more dark than glass, my reflection there faint and layered over the last scraps of starlight the garden no longer visible, only felt in the soft creak of the house, in the memory of damp grass beneath my feet, in the knowledge that the speck still hums its small truth beneath the hedge where it landed, or where I only dreamed it. Did I close the notebook again, stand, and let the house lead me back down the stairs? The kettle waits for me, as if it knows the soft cycle I trust it to keep. I fill it again, the water falling into metal, echoing just enough to remind me how even the simplest sound can feel like a promise. I stand by the counter waiting for the slow rise of steam, listening to the pipes shift behind the walls, listening for the hum that folds around this place as faithfully as any roof or floorboard. The kettle clicks off its small side louder in the hush. I pour the water, watch the swirl of steam lift into the kitchen light, curl, then fade. I carry the mug to the table, sit where the letter once rested beneath my palm, now hidden away again for another night, its words folded into the hum of my thoughts. I drink the tea slowly, letting it cool between sips, each swallow a tiny warmth that slides down into the hush and stays there like a lantern tucked into the pocket of the dark. I wonder if my father ever sat here like this, mug in hand, eyes half closed, questions drifting through him like distant starlight. I think he must have. I think he must have felt this same small pull, this soft weight, this hush that asks nothing more than for me to keep my eyes open, keep my hands steady, keep my breath slow enough to hear the speck hum. I finish the tea, rinse the mug, leave it upside down on the drying rack. The window above the sink shows me only my reflection now, the faint ghost of a woman who listens more than she speaks, who trusts more than she admits, who stands barefoot on cool tiles with a garden full of hidden weight waiting just beyond the glass. I turn off the light, leave the kitchen in shadow, return to the stairs, their creaks greeting me in soft conversation. I pause at the top, hand on the banister, listening to the quiet. I drift into the hallway, the quiet holding me like a hand around my shoulders, warm, steady, asking nothing of me except that I keep breathing, keep placing one foot in front of the other. As I move past the small framed photographs lining the wall, each one a frozen moment that catches my reflection. When I pause, faces I know, half-remembered rooms, long repainted gardens that no longer grow in the same neat lines my grandmother insisted on keeping. I touch one of the frames lightly, my fingertip tracing the glass where my father stands in the old shed, a hammer in his hand, a smile soft and distracted, as if even then he was thinking of something else, something that hums through wood and air and thought. I wonder what small truths hid behind that moment, what drift of questions curled through his mind while he built a shelf or mended a chair or simply stood there feeling the hush that holds the shed in its quiet wooden ribs. I move on, pressing my palm flat against the wall, feeling the slight warmth, the pulse of the house alive in its way. The old floorboards greet my steps, the faint groan of hinges when I open the study door again. The telescope stands patient, its brass spine catching the faint spill of moonlight that slips through the window, a shape half shadow, half promise. I cross the room, the air cooler here, as if the walls remember the chill of clear nights better than the heat of day. I rest my hand on the telescope, the metal cold, but not unkind. My breath fogs the eyepiece for a moment before I lean in and let my eye find the sky, the stars more scattered tonight, small pinpricks of memory hung far enough away that my heartbeat feels louder than their shimmer. I focus on one, the same one perhaps, that has visited me again and again, a small certainty in the drifting dark. I think of the word I wrote last, wait, how even light carries it, how photons once thought to be weightless press gently against the sails of distant satellites, how the hum of the garden might carry its own small weight hidden beneath roots and soil pressing upward into my feet. When I stand barefoot by the pond, I pull back from the eyepiece, let the sky rest, as it always does, untouched by my watching, yet somehow changed in the soft shape of my thoughts. I sit at the desk, open the notebook to its last page, the words lined up like stones set carefully on the edge of a path. Light wave drift shift hum memory wait. I tap the pen against the margin, the faint tick of it, a heartbeat caught in what I think of how each word leans into the next, how none of them stand alone, how the hush I listen to now has always been the same hush my father pressed his breath against when he spoke softly into the dark, wondering if his words might settle into the world the way a seed settles into damp soil. I write another word, echo. It feels right here, a shape that does not begin or end, but folds back into itself, carrying the sound of what came before into what comes next. I whisper it once into the quiet echo. The hush catches it, holds it, returns it back to me, softer but not lost. I close my eyes, picture the garden as it is now, the pond a dark coin catching the shape of the moon, the fox somewhere near the fence, or maybe gone deeper into the neighbor's hedges, carrying my sin on its fur without caring that it does. My father's shed stands in the corner, its roof patched, its windows clouded, but still it hums too. I know it does beneath the clutter of old boxes and broken tools. It holds the echo of his thoughts, the faint weight of his hands on the same wood I touch now. I think of the letter tucked in the tin downstairs, the paper that drifted through other hands, other shelves, other hushes before finding mine, how the ink carries the memory of a pen pressed to paper years before my own pen hovered above this page. I wonder what other echoes hide in this house, if the walls carry my voice when I speak softly in the middle of the night, if the floorboards remember the weight of my footsteps, if the kettle's quiet sigh when it clicks off holds the shape of my father's breath when he waited for steam to rise. I press the pen to the page again, write the word breath below echo, because that too is part of it, this quiet cycle, this gentle drift of air in and out, a small proof that I am here, that the hush does not stand apart from me, but wraps through my lungs and bones the same way the garden hums beneath my feet. I lift the pen, set it down, the notebook open to the soft truth of these small words. I stand and cross to the window, rest my palm against the cool pane, the garden blurred now by the thin sheen of condensation where my breath touched the glass. I trace a small circle there, watching how the warmth spreads, then fades, the pond beyond the hedge invisible, but I know its shape by heart, the gentle slope of its banks, the stones pressed into the mud, the curl of ivy where the fence leans. I imagine the speck there, still the same one, or 100 others drifting beneath the soil, whispering their echo into the roots, into the water, into the soles of my feet. When I crouch there listening for what does not wish to be found, I lean my forehead to the glass, close my eyes, breathe slow and steady, the hum behind my ribs rising to meet the quiet, the way the fox rises from the brambles when the world is still enough to welcome its pause. I stay there a moment longer, letting the house hold me, the walls steady, the floor beneath me, remembering the soft shift of each step I have ever taken from the back door to the pond, from the garden path to this room, where thought folds into hush, and hush folds back into thought. I open my eyes, watch my reflection fade into the dark, see the faint glimmer of the sky beyond the window, the same stars, the same drift, the same soft promise that the light above me carries my own small echo as it moves outward, never lost, only folded into new shapes, waiting to return when I am ready to stand here again, palms pressed to glass, breath leaving its thin ghost across the pane, a reminder that the hush does not ask for answers, only this gentle listening, only this willingness to drift along the edge of what I know, and let the echo find me here again and again and again. When I wake, the house is still, the hush folded so completely into the walls and floor that it feels like stepping into a memory before my feet touch the cold boards. I lie there listening to the quiet, listening for the faint hum that always waits beneath the more obvious sounds, but there is only the soft rhythm of my own breath, the pulse that reminds me I am here. I sit up, swing my legs over the edge of the bed, the air is cool, a small shiver moves along my spine, and for a moment I imagine the garden before I see it, the pond catching the weak light of dawn, the hedge leaning heavy with dew, the fence line softened by drifting ivy, and the fox perhaps tucked somewhere out of sight, nose pressed to paws. In the patient comfort of sleep, I stand and stretch my arms, reaching for a ceiling that remembers more mornings like this than I do. My fingertips brush the faint line where the paint cracked years ago and never quite covered again, a small truth in plaster that reminds me not everything needs to be mended at once. I move to the window, push the curtain aside, the glass cool against my palm as I rest it there. The sky is pale and empty of color, not yet pink or gold, just the soft blank hush that comes before the first bird wakes. The garden is a shadow of itself, shapes more than details, but I know every line by heart, where the stones of the path buckle slightly, where the pond curves into the tall grass that tries every year to swallow its edges. I wonder if the speck is there beneath the surface of the water, pressed into the silt, or drifting slowly through the roots, the drink-in secrets along with rain. I press my forehead lightly to the glass, breathe out, watch the faint mist of it spread and vanish before it can mark anything lasting. When I step back, the chill clings to my skin, a reminder that I am warm inside, while the world waits outside for the sun to slip over the fence and scatter its warmth like crumbs for the fox to follow. I dress in layers, pulling on a sweater that still smells faintly of old lavender from the drawer, the sleeves worn at the cuffs, the kind of comfort that never asks me to explain why I keep it even when I could buy something new. The stairs sigh under my feet, the house greeting me in its own language, the pipes settling the beams, remembering each winter they have carried over my head. The kettle waits on the stove, its spout angled slightly toward the window, as if it too wants to watch the slow reveal of the day. I fill it and listen to the water gather its quiet weight in the metal belly, a sound that is part of this ritual, part of the hush that ties each morning to the next. While the kettle hums, I wander to the back door, push it open just enough to let the garden's breath slip inside. The air meets me cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of earth waking up. The pond is clearer now, a silver mouth in the half-light, catching the first shapes of dawn. I step outside barefoot, feeling the stones under my soles, the cold press of them grounding me, the small grit where moss finds its chance between the cracks. I walk slowly to the pond, each breath lifting a soft steam into the air that drifts around my face, then dissolves. I crouch at the edge, the water still enough to show me my own reflection layered over the drifting sky, a ghost on the surface that blinks. When I do, I reach out, touch the water lightly, the chill snaps through my fingertips, up my wrist, a small shock of honesty that makes me smile, because it is so simple, so clear, so unbothered by all my thoughts. The ripples widen from my touch, bend the pale shape of my face until it is only circles folding into circles. I imagine the speck down there somewhere, nestled in the silt, or perhaps brushing against the tiny roots that drink from this pond. Maybe it hums still, maybe it has always hummed, not for me, but for itself, a quiet truth that does not care who listens. I stand, brush my damp fingers against my sweater, and look up. The sky has softened to a pale blush near the fence line. A single bird calls out, tentative, as if testing whether its voice still works in the cold. I step back toward the door, the kettle's whistle drifting through the open space, pulling me back inside where warmth waits. I pour the water over the tea bag, watch the color bloom into the swirl of steam. I lean against the counter, mug cup between my palms, feeling the heat spread into my skin. The window above the sink shows me the garden again, but brighter now, details returning where shadows give way to light. The hedge no longer just a shape, but a tangle of leaves and thin branches. The pond a soft gleam that holds its secrets beneath the calm surface. I wonder if the fox has passed through yet, if its paws left tiny prints near the fence that I might find later if I care to look, or maybe it knows when I am awake and chooses another garden, one that does not hum with the same questions I carry. I sip the tea, too hot at first, then just right that tastes familiar and quiet, a warmth that settles behind my ribs, where the hush waits, where the echo of my father's voice sometimes flickers not in words exactly but in the shape of an idea that stays even after I can no longer remember how he said it. I think of the notebook upstairs, the last word I left on the page, breath, how it ties me to this moment, to the quiet drift of steam, to the cold pond, to the soft weight of the speck pressed into the soil, or silt, or thought I carry. The mug upstairs, each step steady, careful, as if not to spill a drop. The study waits, the telescope angled toward a sky now too bright for stars, but still holding the memory of them somewhere beyond my sight. I sit at the desk, open the notebook, press my hand flat on the page, feeling the slight texture of paper, the faint scratch where the pen pressed too hard, the last word, breath, patient in its small place. I lift the pen, let it hover before writing root. The word feels right here, another small truth to follow, a path that reaches down instead of up, a reminder that the drift is not only outward but inward too, that beneath the hush, beneath the hum, beneath the soft press of my feet on cold stone, there is always something reaching back, pressing upward, asking nothing but to hold the weight of whatever drifts down. I whisper at root, feel the sound slip into the quiet, the echo gentle against the walls. I close the notebook again, stand by the window, let my eyes drift over the garden, the light clearer now, the sky pale, but certain, the pond still and small and vast at once. I think of the speck, think of my father, think of the hush that breathes through this old house, through the garden, through my own slow breath. I stand there a little longer, mug warm in my hands, listening for the hum beneath it all, the soft promise that whatever drifts outward finds its roots somewhere in the hush, waiting for me to stand still. The afternoon arrives almost without me noticing it, the hours slipping through my open window, one breath at a time, until the soft light settles along the floorboards, like a quiet guest that asks nothing but to rest here with me for a while. I sit at the desk, the notebook open, though my pen lies still across the margin, a small bridge between the words I have written and the ones that hover just beyond my reach. The telescope stands near the window, its brass spine warm now from the sun that has drifted high enough to lay its soft weight across the glass. I lift my eyes from the page and watch the garden below, the pond bright in the spill of daylight, the hedge alive with tiny movements of leaves and shadows that hint at birds or insects, or the quiet brush of a fox slipping unseen between green and green. The first wonder if the speck hums differently in the daylight, if the warmth pulls it closer to the surface, or if it sinks deeper, pressed into the dark cool soil where roots gather around it like small hands cupping a secret. I think of the word I last wrote, root, how it holds so many things in its small shape, the downward reach, the hidden network, the quiet insistence that something must anchor itself before it can grow. I close my eyes and see the lines beneath the garden, the thin white threads of roots twisting through the damp earth, weaving around stones and worms, and the soft hum of the speck, or maybe that hum is only mine. I do not know where one begins and the other ends. I stand, stretch my arms overhead, feel the pull of my shoulders, the small crack that releases a breath. I did not know I was holding the house, sighs to a faint shift in the walls that reminds me, it listens, it remembers. I slip downstairs, the steps creaking under my weight, each board greeting me, as it always does, with a soft complaint that sounds more like welcome than protest. In the kitchen the kettle sits quiet, the mug from the morning rests near the sink, a thin ring of dried tea at its base. I rinse it out, feel the warmth of water against my fingertips, the tiny swirl as it slips down the drain, taking with it nothing I will miss. I fill the kettle again, the sound of water pooling inside the metal shell grounding me. In the simplest way I listen to the soft click of the stove, the hush that fills the space between the slow rise of steam and the faint hum I carry behind my ribs. The garden beyond the window leans closer now, the afternoon light shifting through the hedge, painting small gold shapes Across the counter, I stand there watching the pond catch the sky, a cloud drifting low enough to press its reflection into the water, so that for a moment the pond seems deeper, wider, a place that might hold more than its surface suggests. I wonder if my father saw it this way, if he stood here mug in hand, eyes half on the kettle, half on the garden, tracing the same lines I trace now, with my breath, my thoughts, the soft drift of memory that asks no questions, but leaves them anyway like stones along a path. I pour the tea, watch the color bloom, then settle. I carry the mug to the door, pause there with my hand on the handle, feeling the faint warmth slip through the porcelain into my palm. I step outside, the air meets me, gentle, cool enough to remind me that the day will not stay bright forever, that soon the sun will slip behind the hedge, and the pond will fold itself back into dusk. I walk slowly along the path, my bare feet pressing the warm stones, my toes brushing against stray blades of grass that grow where they should not, but I let them stay because the garden does not mind, and neither do I. I pause at the edge of the pond, crouched there, the mug balanced against my knee, the steam curling upward to vanish into air that does not need it. I dip my free hand into the water, feel the quick cold wrap my fingers, the small shock of it slipping through skin into bone. I think of the speck again, how it might drift just beneath my touch, how it might hum against my knuckles if I only knew how to listen properly. I lift my hand, watch the droplets fall back into the pond, tiny circles folding outward until they vanish into the hush of still water. I sip the tea, careful of its heat, the taste soft enough to remind me that sometimes comfort needs no story, no explanation, just warmth against my tongue, breath against my throat. I look up, see the sky caught in the pond's shallow mirror, a second sky folded into this small patch of earth. I imagine the fox somewhere beyond my sight, its nose pressed to the fence line, its eyes reflecting the same light that drifts through my window at night. I wonder if it senses the hum, if it pauses when it crosses the garden, feels the soft pull of something settled just beneath the soil. I sip again, the mug warm against my fingers. I shift to sit on the flat stone near the bank, feel its heat through my jeans, the way it holds the sun long after the air forgets it. I close my eyes for a moment, let the hush fill my ears, the faint rustle of leaves, the single call of a bird that sounds once, then falls silent. I think of my father in his shed, pencil tapping paper, his breath caught in the hush that listens as carefully as I do now. I wonder if he found what he was looking for, or if, like me, he learned to love the drift more than the answer. I open my eyes, the garden unchanged, the pond calm, as if it does not mind my wondering. I finish the tea, set the mug beside me on the stone, my fingers brushing the damp rim where steam has cooled into small beads of water. I press my palm flat against the ground, feel the warmth of the stone, the cool of the soil beneath it, the quiet insistence that roots reach down and down, carrying the hush deeper than I can see. I stand again, pick up the empty mug, carry it back along the path, each step slow, careful, as if not to disturb the thin line of thought that hums through the grass into my feet. I pause at the door, look back once, the pond a small circle of light, the hedge a soft wall of green, the fence leaning where the ivy pulls it forward year by year. I step inside, close the door behind me, let the house hold me again, its quiet breath wrapping around my shoulders. I rinse the mug, set it back on the shelf above the sink. The window above it shows me only the garden's reflection, the hedge, the pond, the sky pressed flat against the glass. I touch the pane, watch my fingerprint bloom, then fade. I turn back to the stairs, climb them slowly, each step a soft reminder that this hush is not new, that it has drifted through these walls long before my breath, long before the speck settled in the garden. I sit at the desk, open the notebook, press my hand to the page where root waits for another word. I pick up the pen, let it hover for a moment before I write. Soil, the word feels right here, a bed for the root, a place for the drift to settle, a reminder that what holds me is not only what drifts above, but what. Evening settles over the house, like a blanket drawn soft across my shoulders, the light outside slipping through the garden hedge in thin quiet strands that stretch across the kitchen floor, catching on the old tiles where I stand barefoot, mug in hand, the kettle's faint sigh drifting into the hush that has grown deeper as the day faded. I lean against the counter, feeling the warmth of the tea slip through my palms into my skin, a small, steady comfort that anchors me here while my thoughts drift back to the pond, to the flat stone where I sat listening to the water fold its ripples around my fingertips, wondering if the speck hidden beneath the silt remembers the moment it fell, if it holds the soft weight of my father's voice folded inside its tiny shape, a memory pressed so deep that it hums only when the garden is quiet enough to hear it. I lift the mug to my lips, breathe in the steam, let it warm the tip of my nose before I drink. The taste familiar, the same leaves steeped in the same chipped cup, the same breath slipping from my chest as I stand alone, but not lonely in this hush that feels more like company than emptiness. I turn from the sink, my eyes catching the window where dusk has painted the pond into a dark coin, flickering with the last threads of sky, a single star caught just above the hedge, waiting for me to look up and see it. Patient old light, reminding me that drift does not mean lost, that what leaves does not always vanish. I carry the mug through the hallway, my fingers curled around the handle, my thumb pressed against the warm rim. I pass the photographs on the wall, let my gaze brush over my father's face, half turned as if he hears me moving through the hush, his eyes focused on something I cannot see but feel pressing softly at the edges of my breath. I pause there a moment, my shoulder leaning into the wall, my heartbeat steady against the quiet. I wonder if he knew when he stood in the shed, when he folded scraps of thought into the pages of a paper left to sleep in a box, if he knew I would find his drift, catch it like a seed pressed into my palm, waiting for the right warmth to open. I move on, climbing the stairs slowly, careful not to spill the tea, careful not to startle the hush that hums around me. The study greets me with its old with smell, the faint dust caught in the glow of the lamp I left on the telescope by the window angles its brass neck toward the darkening sky, the lens catching the faint ghost of the first true night. I set the mug down beside the notebook, run my finger along the edge of the open page, the last word soil still damp in my mind, like earth turned beneath my nails. I think of roots pressing down, feel the faint echo of my hand against the garden path, where I knelt, pressing my palm to the ground, listening for something that does not speak but answers anyway. I lift the pen from where it rests, like a thin branch across the paper. I do not write yet. I hold it above the word soil, breathing in the hush, breathing out the drift of thought that settles in its own time. I look out the window, the garden below folded into shadows, the pond invisible now, but not gone. I know its shape, know the line of the fence that leans into ivy year by year, patient as breath. I think of the fox too, its quiet paws pressing along the edges of the garden fence, slipping through the brambles, carrying the scent of damp leaves, and my questions tucked into its fur without ever knowing it. Does I think maybe that is what the speck is too, a small fox of thought drifting through the roots, through the soil, humming its soft truth into the dark where I kneel and listen. I press the pen down at last, write another word, seed, because that is what this is, this hush, this hum, this thought that waits beneath the skin of things pressing upward. When I am quiet enough to feel it, I whisper it into the room. See, the walls seem to breathe in response, the floorboards shift as if they too hold the faint memory of 1,000 seeds drifting through the hush of years, settling, pressing, sprouting their small green truths in corners I have yet to see. I close my eyes, picture the garden tomorrow, the pond catching light again, the hedge holding the slow drift of morning air, the fox perhaps sitting near the fence watching the sun slip through leaves, nose lifted to catch the weight of spring pressing into the soil, the speck somewhere beneath all of it wrapped in its own silence, humming alongside worms and stones and tiny roots that twist through the damp earth. I open my eyes again. The telescope waits. I lean down, adjust the angle, until it finds the first star, the same patient shimmer that has followed me through these nights, reminding me the drift does not end, it only changes shape, moves outward, then inward, folds back on itself like breath. I rest my eye against the scope, the cold brass pressing a soft ring into my skin. The star wavers slightly, a pulse through the thin fabric of atmosphere, the light bending across distances so wide I cannot hold them all in my mind, so I do not try. I just watch, breathe, feel the hush hum through my bones, a small promise that nothing is lost, not really, not when we listen. I pull back, let the lens go dark again, my reflection faint in the glass layered with the ghost of starlight. I sit at the desk, fingers brushing the words on the page, seed, soil, root, breath, each one folded into the next like the rings of a tree. I think of my father's hands pressing seeds into the old garden beds long before the hedge grew wild, before the pond mirrored more sky than rose petals. His voice in the hush telling me how roots know where to go, how they twist through stone and shadow to find what they need. I think maybe that is what I am doing now, twisting through thought, pressing my own roots down through paper and night, and the soft drift of the hum that waits for me to notice it. I take the last sip of tea, cold now, but still carrying warmth in the shape of memory. I close the notebook, leave the pen resting across its spine like a branch laid gently over new earth. I stand at the window again, the garden below, the sky above, the hush between them folding through me. I press my palm to the glass, feel the cold slip into my skin, not unkind, just true, a reminder that even in drift there is contact, a place where the world presses back. I breathe once, twice, the window fogs, then clears. I watch the pond hold its darkness, the hedge lean its secrets into the fence, the fox, if it is there, watches too, breath caught between root and seed, and the slow hush that reminds me the speck is not only in the garden, but here in me, drifting, humming, pressing its small weight into the soft soil of thought that grows quiet enough to listen. Night deepens until the house feels smaller, somehow wrapped tight in its old wood and soft pipes, and the hush that settles into the corners where my breath drifts and collects like a thin layer of dust that never asks to be swept away. I stand by the window, my palm flat to the glass, feeling the cold slip through my skin into my bones in a way that is not unwelcome, a gentle reminder that I am here, standing in this old study, watching the garden fold itself into the darkness I can no longer see, but know is there, the pond hidden beneath the hedge, its shallow water holding the memory of the sky pressed into its surface long after the stars have moved on. I wonder if the fox slips through tonight, if its paws find the soft earth near the pond, if its nose brushes the place where I pressed my own hand earlier today, the shape of my palm perhaps already gone, erased by the drift of wind and time, but maybe the memory of it lingers beneath the surface, the same way the speck lingers hidden, or maybe drifting through the roots that spread out beneath the grass like quiet veins carrying a hum I feel sometimes in my chest. When the house is this still, I step back from the window, move to the desk, run my fingers over the spine of the notebook, the pen lying across its cover like a line waiting for my hand to cross it. I lift the pen, but I do not open the pages yet. Instead, I let the metal rest against my lower lip, breathing in the faint taste of ink and the slow drift of old air that smells like paper, and the echo of words that settled here before I knew how to find them. I think of my father again, not just the way he stood at the shed workbench or bent over the pond watching the water fold itself around the stones, but the way he spoke sometimes, when he did not think I was listening, soft questions spoken to no one, to the hush itself, to the speck perhaps long before I knew to look for it. I wonder now if he felt the same pull, the same soft ache at the edges of the night when the garden hummed through the thin glass of the kitchen window. I open the notebook, at last see the words pressed into the page, soil, root, seed, each one settled in its place like stones laid along a garden bed waiting for rain. I lower the pen, write another word, bloom, because that is what must come next, what the root reaches for, what the soil holds, what the seed carries hidden in its smallest promise. I whisper it, bloom, the sound slipping into the hush, like a leaf settling on water, a small ripple that widens and then fades, but never really vanishes. I close my eyes, see the garden as it might look tomorrow morning, when the first thin sunlight finds the pond, when the hedge leans in to catch the warmth, when the fox, if it comes, will pause near the stone where I crouched, my knees damp from the cold ground, my breath folding into the hush that rose around me like mist. I see the speck too, not with my eyes, but with that soft part of me that listens better than it sees, drifting beneath the soil, pressing against roots that curl around it, carrying its hum upward into stems, into leaves, into the patient promise of a single bloom. I stand and move away from the desk, my hand trailing along the back of the chair, the old wood cool beneath my fingertips. I step into the hallway. The photographs on the wall catch the lamplight, my father's face, my grandmother's careful hands tending roses that no longer grow here, the corners of old rooms where the hush looks out from behind the glass, waiting for my eyes to find it. I pause on the stairs, my bare feet pressed to the worn step. The hush wraps around me thicker here, as if the house leans in to hear the shape of my breath, the small weight of my thought, the steady echo of my pulse against the wood. I step down into the kitchen. The kettle waits, its metal belly cold now, but ready the same way it always is. The mug beside the sink, chipped rim catching the light from the single bulb above the counter. I fill the kettle again, the water spilling with a sound that feels older than any word I have written, older than the hush, older than the speck. The kettle clicks on, hums a note that threads through the pipes and settles under my skin. I stand there waiting, one hand resting against the edge of the sink, my eyes drifting to the window where my own reflection floats, layered over the faint outline of the hedge beyond the glass. I wonder if the fox pauses here too, nose to the grass, ears flicking as it listens for the soft click of the kettle. My breath fogs the glass for a moment, a brief ghost that fades before it can gather. The kettle sighs when it finishes, a soft release that feels like a promise. I pour the water over the waiting leaves, watch the swirl of steam rise to meet my face, the scent earthy and warm, the same as every night, yet different too, because I am different each time. I stand here, mug in hand, hush in my bones, the speck humming where I cannot touch it but feel it all the same. I carry the mug back through the hallway, the photographs watching me pass, the floor creaking in small quiet greetings. The study welcomes me with the thin warmth of the lamp, the telescope by the window still angled toward a sky that now holds more dark than light. I do not look through it tonight. Instead, I stand with the mug cradled against my chest, my eyes on the notebook closed again, the pen resting across it like a stem waiting for a bloom. I sip the tea, careful of its heat, the warmth settling behind my ribs, folding into the hum that waits there. The hush grows deeper, softer, more patient, as if it knows I am ready to listen in a new way. I move to the window, rest my free hand against the glass, the cold slipping into my skin, a small honest touch that reminds me that inside and outside are not so different, the garden invisible but present, the pond holding the memory of the day, the hedge breathing in the night air, the fox somewhere near or far or nowhere at all, carrying my questions on its fur. Without knowing, without needing to know, I close my eyes, whisper bloom again, let the word slip from my mouth into the hush, where it settles, joins root, soil, seed, hum, drift, wave, light, all the words that drifted before it, all the ones that wait still unspoken, like seeds beneath the dark soil pressing upward when the hush is ready to hold them. I finish the tea, rinse the mug, leave it on the counter where it can dry in its own time. The hallway greets me again as I pass the stairs, the creak of wood, the hush that folds through the walls, a soft voice reminding me that drift is not departure, that bloom is not the end, but a beginning hidden in the hush, pressed into the soil, humming in the dark, where I stand waiting, breathing, listening for the small, steady promise that what I cannot see still grows all the same. The morning does not announce itself loudly, it drifts in quietly through the loose edges of the curtains, a pale slip of light that finds my eyelids before my mind is ready to lift itself from sleep. I lie still for a moment, feeling how the hush of night has only softened, not disappeared, how it waits with me in this thin space where dream and waking touch the same edge of thought. I listen for the small sounds, the shift of wood, the breath of the pipes, the faint tick of the clock near the hallway, the kettle sighing in its corner, as if it too dreams. When I finally rise, I feel the cool air gather around my ankles, the boards beneath my feet remember my weight, the small shape of my steps pressing into the same places they always find. I pause by the window before I leave the room. The garden below is pale in the new light, the pond folded into the soft silver of dawn, the hedge heavy with the damp promise of dew. The fox, if it passed through, has left no visible trace, but I imagine it anyway, knows to the ground, tail drifting behind it like a thought slipping through ivy. I wonder if the speck hums louder in this soft beginning, if the soil carries its note up through the roots into the damp air, or if it waits patient and still hidden beneath the pond where my fingertips touched the surface days ago, when the hush leaned close enough for me to feel its breath. I carried that thought with me down the stairs, each step an old friend beneath my soles, the photographs on the wall catch the early light, my father's smile, my grandmother's careful eyes, the rooms behind them, all doors I can never open, but somehow always step through. I stand in the kitchen for a long moment, my hand on the cold curve of the kettle, the mug beside the sink waiting, as it always does, its chip catching a slip of sun that finds its way through the hedge. I fill the kettle, let the water gather its small weight, its promise of warmth. The sound echoes soft through the hush that lives between pipe and tile and window. I watch the garden while I wait. The pond holds the first clear shape of the sky, a faint reflection that wavers when the wind slips across the surface. A single bird calls from somewhere behind the fence, a quick note that rises and falls like breath. I wonder if it sees the speck, if it feels the drift beneath its feet. When it lands near the pond, dips its beak, lifts its head to the sky. I wonder if the roots know the echo, the small hum that folds through soil and stone, up through stem and leaf. I wonder if I know it too, or if all of this is only the soft shape of my wanting. The kettle clicks off, its quiet voice reminding me that waiting does not mean standing still, that the hush holds its own motion, its own bloom, that does not need my naming. I pour the water, watch the tea swirl dark and warm, the steam drifts up, catches my face, slips into my hair, leaves no trace but the soft warmth that settles behind my eyes. I carry the mug to the back door, push it open with my shoulder, step outside. Barefoot onto the cool stone, the garden greets me damp and honest, the pond brightening as the sun finds it, the hedge leaning into the light, the fence line softened by ivy that presses upward year after year. I walk slowly to the pond, crouch at its edge, the mug balanced against my knee, my free hand reaching out to touch the water again. The chill finds my skin, slips through my bones, a soft truth that does not hurt, but reminds me I am here. The ripples widen, drift to the far edge where they fade into the hush of reeds. I sip the tea, careful not to spill its warmth into the water, though I imagine the pond would welcome it, fold it into its slow secrets as easily as it folds light and leaf and the small hum of the speck hidden in its silt. I close my eyes, breathe in the scent of damp earth, the faint sweetness of grass, the quiet that drifts between each small sound. I hear the fox, even if I do not see it, its breath moving the hedge, its paws pressing into the soft shape of the path. I wonder if it carries seeds in its fur, if it leaves them where it slips through the fence, tiny promises of green that find their place when no one watches. I finish the tea, stand again, the pond behind me now, the house ahead, its windows catching the sun in small pieces, bright enough to remind me that even the hush carries its own light. I step back inside, set the mug in the sink, rinse it, feel the water slip across my skin, colder than the tea, but warmer than the pond, a small bridge between two kinds of hush. I climb the stairs again. The notebook waits open where I left it, the pen resting across the page, the word bloom holding its place. The paper smells faintly of dust, of old thought, of a quiet that remembers more than I do. I press my hand flat against the page, feel the faint texture, the slight dip where ink met fiber. I lift the pen, write the last word I know to write here. Listen, because that is what I have done, because that is all this ever asked of me. The hush, the speck, the garden, the pond, the fox, each one carrying its own small drift of truth, pressing it into soil, into root, into the quiet shape of my breath, waiting for me to lean close enough to hear it. I close the notebook, leave the pen resting like a stem across the cover. My hand lingers on its spine, my thumb brushing the grain, the faint warmth left behind by my skin. I stand at the window again, the sun higher now, the pond brighter, the garden awake in its soft, honest way. The hedge catches the breeze, bends without breaking the fence, leans but does not fall. I imagine the fox near the far edge, nose lifted to catch the drift of my thought. The hush hums through the glass into my palm, into my chest. I close my eyes, listen one last time, not for an answer, not for an ending, but for the quiet, steady promise. The drift does not vanish, that root holds what we cannot, that soil hums even when I do not kneel to hear it, that bloom finds its own moment, that listen is enough. I open my eyes, breathe out, the hush wraps around me, folds through the garden, through the pond, through the small unseen shape of the speck that hums its quiet truth beneath it all. I stand there, not waiting, not searching, just here with my hand against the glass, my breath fogging the morning for a moment before it clears, carrying the soft echo of everything I have learned to hear.